It's 2:00 here in the US.
All right, so it's ready. Okay.
And you're at 8:00, correct?
Correct.
All right. All right. So I just wanted to welcome everyone. I see so many of our Studio B friends and family, and I just want to thank all of you for coming today and joining us for this wonderful space that we're sharing today with Ty Powers. Ty is joining us from Malta, and I'd like to just start by introducing Ty, and then we'll get started with the space today. So Ty co-founded the Insight Yoga Institute and has been leading Buddhist mindfulness meditation retreats throughout the world for over 20 years. He completed the Spirit Rock Community Dharma Leader Training Program in 2003, and he has led day-long retreats on issues concerning cultural diversity. He is also a certified, sorry, a little
Okay, you cut out there.
Yeah, I apologize. Let me read that last sentence. He is also a certified integral coach and mentor to many people internationally, including myself, and I know many of the people here today. Ty has also completed level 3 of the Internal Family Systems Therapy Program created by Dr. Richard Schwartz, and having recently graduated from Philip Moffitt's Change and Transitions Program. Ty is now leading weekend workshops and offering sessions based on these themes. And he is the Senior Ethics Advisor at Studio B. And we're so proud today to have you here with us, Ty.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Jen. That's a wonderful introduction. If I can live up to that, we'll see how that goes. All right, well, I think maybe the first thing I want to do is play something for you all, because I think it's quite relevant to what we're going to discuss and where we may find ourselves in the middle of that discussion. It's only 8 minutes. It's led by a man named Sam Harris. For those of you who don't know who he is, he's written some well-known books. He's a Buddhist philosopher. He's also a neuroscientist. He wrote a book way back when called The End of Faith. Quite an interesting book. And he has a podcast now, which is a very interesting podcast. In fact, I recommend it highly for all of you. It incorporates a lot of different ideas about where we are in the world and where we might go, given that fact. So, without further waiting, let's try and play this.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. And can everyone see the screen here? Okay, great.
So if you can't see it for some reason, it's called The Key to Trump's Appeal. And it's just an audio.
Welcome to the Making Sense podcast. This is Sam Harris. Okay, well, it is the day before the presidential election, and I don't know why it has taken me this long to understand this, but you be the judge as to whether this should have been at all hard to understand. As all of you know, I've been struggling for years to understand how it is possible that nearly half of American society admires or at least supports Donald Trump. I've spoken with Trump voters in search of illumination, but illumination never came. For instance, I had Scott Adams on my podcast to explain this to me, and he described Trump as a master persuader, perhaps the best he's ever seen. But the problem for me is that I find Trump to be among the least persuasive people I have ever come across. Whenever I see him speak, I see an obvious con man and ignoramus. In fact, Trump seems to be so unaware of how people like me judge a person's credibility that his efforts to appear credible, such as they are, always make him look ridiculous and even deranged. So the claim that he's a brilliant persuader makes about as much sense to me as the claim that he's a model of physical fitness would. Right? In my world, the claim can be disproven at a glance. And yet one thing is undeniable, right? Half the country views him very differently. Now, until a few minutes ago, I had more or less reconciled myself to never understanding this. But I believe at this late hour, on the very eve of the 2020 election, I have discovered a significant part of Trump's appeal. In particular, I think I finally understand how he is supported because of his flaws, rather than in spite of them. That really is the key. How are all the things I find despicable in him not merely things that people are willing to overlook, but reasons in and of themselves why people support him? Okay, that's what I didn't understand until this moment. Now, I have repeatedly described the man's flaws on this podcast. To my eye, he lacks nearly every virtue for which we have a word: wisdom, curiosity, compassion, generosity, discipline, courage. Whatever your list, he's got none of these things. But his supporters know that. And he's a paragon of greed and narcissism and pettiness and malice, real malice. I mean, this is a man who wears his hatreds on his sleeve. And he will suddenly revile people who he claimed to admire only yesterday. So while he demands loyalty from everyone around him, really above all else, he is an amazingly disloyal person. All of this is right on the surface. So his appeal has been a total mystery to me. But I believe I have now solved that mystery. Again, I don't know why it took me so long, because many of these thoughts have been in my head since the beginning. And I've certainly heard people describe some parts of this picture. But the whole image just fell into place for me. It's like one of those magic eye illustrations where you're staring at a random dot stereogram forever, and then finally the embedded 3D image just pops out. And this picture of Trump's appeal is really best understood in comparison with the messaging of his opponents on the left. That's how you can see it in stereo. That's how the image finally pops out. So taking the Trump half of this picture. One thing that Trump never communicates and cannot possibly communicate is a sense of his moral superiority. The man is totally without sanctimony. Even when his every utterance is purposed towards self-aggrandizement, even when he appears to be denigrating his supporters, even when he's calling himself a genius, he is never actually communicating that he is better than you, more enlightened, more decent, because he's not, and everyone knows it. The man is just a bundle of sin and gore, and he never pretends to be anything more. Perhaps more importantly, he never even aspires to be anything more. And because of this, because he is never really judging you, he can't possibly judge you. He offers a truly safe space for human frailty and hypocrisy and self-doubt. He offers what no priest can credibly offer: a total expiation of shame. His personal shamelessness is a kind of spiritual balm. Trump is fat Jesus. He's grab them by the pussy Jesus. He's I'll eat nothing but cheeseburgers if I want to Jesus. He's I want to punch them in the face Jesus. He's go back to your shithole countries Jesus. He's no apologies Jesus. And now consider the other half of this image. What are we getting from the left? We're getting exactly the opposite message. Pure sanctimony, pure judgment. You are not good enough. You're guilty not only for your own sins, but for the sins of your fathers. The crimes of slavery and colonialism are on your head. And if you're a cis, white, heterosexual male, which we know is the absolute core of Trump's support, you're a racist, homophobic, transphobic, Islamophobic, sexist barbarian. Tear down those statues and bend the fucking knee. It's the juxtaposition of those two messages that is so powerful. Now, I'm sure many of you have understood this before me, but for whatever reason, this image just became crystal clear. Needless to say, everything I've said about Trump previously still stands for me. I consider him to be terrifyingly unfit for office, and I consider most of his personal flaws to be public dangers. I think because of who he is as a person, he has harmed our politics and diminished our standing in the world to a degree that might take decades to repair. So I sincerely hope we rid ourselves of him tomorrow. But I believe I now understand the half of the country that disagrees with me a little better than I did yesterday. And this makes me less confused and judgmental, less of an asshole, probably, which is always progress.
Thank you, Jen, for sharing that. And certainly you'll have some ideas, all of you, after hearing that, about that one. And certainly you'll have some ideas around how you might have contributed to exactly what he's speaking of, that level of sanctimoniousness that I certainly raised my hand to. There have been statements I have made that have indeed been very much not the statements that someone like me, someone that's a therapist and a Buddhist practitioner, would make. These are statements. I'm going to read this is not one of my statements, and it's not one that I necessarily agree with, but this is interesting in light of what Sam just said. So this was on Instagram yesterday. If you voted for Trump, I mean this in the most disrespectful way possible. I do not want anything to do with you. Not only did you vote against basic human rights and equality, you decided racism, homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, and misogynistic behavior wasn't a deal breaker. So that's kind of on the other side. That strong a separation between me and you. And so what are we going to do from here? Where are we going to go from here? Now, of course, it goes without saying that when people are marching through the streets saying Jews won't replace me, there needs to be some counter message to that that's not necessarily aggressive, but there, alive and well and powerful, and that can be done. But in terms of the everyday messages we send out to each other, to our families, especially if we're on the same, quote, team, as it were, these everyday messages have made their way out into the airwaves and are helping to continue to create the polarities that we're seeing and feeling so vehemently on both sides today. So in kind of further opening up this discussion amongst all of you, because I really do want to hear from you, that is the basic premise. What are we doing in our own lives that is adding to this message that there's a certain part of our body politic, and you can think of this in terms of internal family systems therapy, which is the idea that we all have lots of different parts, and these different parts are all vying for attention inside the system, not only attention, but respect. And if not respect, at least a place at the table where we're tolerated. And if we don't have that, if we don't have some semblance of that within our own heart mind, there's disharmony. And it's very difficult to work with various parts of ourselves that we dislike or don't like. In fact, what we do with those parts in general, as you know, who've studied IFS, we exile those parts. And so we could actually overlay IFS therapy to American politics right now. And we've started to exile parts of our own body. And again, just to be sure you understand what I mean by this, there are some things that need to change. There are some despicable ideas out there, as Sam said about the president, some of the things he says and feels. So it's not to say that we shouldn't do something about that. We don't necessarily have to accept those things at their face value. And of course, we do want to remember that there is absolutely a hierarchy of values. There's definitely a hierarchy of values. And the value, I think, of equality or the value of tolerance is a more evolved quality than one of intolerance and bigotry and hatred and so forth. So again, these are things that it's coming down to working against in this time in our history. But the way we work with it is also one of the things I want to bring forth tonight. How do we work with this level of polarity? So one of the ways to work with it, to start off, is how are you stimulating and cultivating any ongoing wars within yourself? That's the kind of the first order of Buddhist, if you will, business. So how is that occurring inside of you? What's the war? And if you've identified the war, what steps have you at least attempted to take to calm the heat down? So now, backing up just a little bit to where we find ourselves in this time in history, it's interesting. We booked this a couple of months back, figuring that by Friday we would certainly have some idea of who was actually the president. And I find that very interesting because it's there's kind of twofold thing going on right now. The feeling around the world, and Sarah and I have certainly can say that honestly because we've traveled it, and we've done a fair amount of travel within COVID time. We've been in 5 different countries the last just couple of months. And there is, since there's not a vaccine or a solid method of dealing with it, there's uncertainty, there's confusion, there's not knowing where we are. And that produces a kind of anxiety and frustration for most of us. So the question becomes, how do we handle being in the midst of uncertainty and frustration? And then now, especially for Americans and increasingly the rest of the world, a lot of people here, even in Malta, are talking about the American election. So Americans are asking this question of, well, who's going to be the next president? There's limbo there. And even in the answer, let's say the answer is Joe Biden, there's a lot of forces at work against what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party at least espouse to believing. So even if they are elected, there's going to be more conflict and so on. So the question still becomes, in the midst of things not being certain, not being stable, what do we do? What are we doing? And this is the question I want to throw out there, rather than give any answers to this, is to ask you individually, and anyone can speak up at any time. I can say perhaps first what supports me at a time like this, where uncertainty, Sarah and I have been in uncertain circumstances living in London, being American citizens, having our visa be limited and then having to bounce around Europe to make it all work. We're applying for residency here right now, but there's a lot of uncertainties in our lives. And so we continually ask ourselves, so with all these various uncertainties, not to mention the ones we can't even see yet, what are we doing to support ourselves and each other? And so that's my question to each of you now, to just speak to the group. What would you offer that you're doing as a support for yourself right now? So back to me for a second. Nature. So being out in nature and reappreciating what nature has to offer to the human eye, to the human heart, to the human body. So we've been fortunate to have been in the Mediterranean the last 6 months. So it's been gorgeous. Being in the water is so soothing and helpful. And of course, our practices, each other, our friends, family, and so on. And so, what is it for you? And maybe the question following, whatever it is for you, are you actually doing whatever it normally is for you to bring that about? So please.
Thank you so much. Just feel free to jump in.
Hi, my name is Jyoti. I think for me, it's continuing to cultivate safety within my own body. I lived a long portion of my early adulthood and life feeling very unsafe in my own body. And so for me, even if I'm feeling very anxious, very stressed, very uncertain and unsettled, taking the time to build the trust within myself allows me to show up in the world.
Thank you, Jyoti. Before you jump off, what do you do in particular?
So yoga for sure, my yoga practice for sure, which often is very simple and about 10 to 15 minutes because most of the time my kids are at home. So it's not complicated. It's short, it's simple, it's moving my body, feeling the breath in my body, and then hopefully finding about 5 minutes of stillness at the end of that. For me, movement usually comes first. I can't get to the stillness until I move a little bit. So, yes.
Great, thank you. Who else?
Hey, Ty, it's Maria.
Oh, I thought that was Sally speaking, but no. Hey.
Thank you for sharing Sam Harris' words. That was very great perspective and spoke to what I've been trying to do every time I find myself judging, to literally stop and redirect my thoughts in a different direction, just to really make it a point to not fall into that trap of thinking that everybody who voted for Trump is just stupid. And recently I was driving behind a big truck with big Trump flags and, you know, all the stickers, and my initial reaction was to stop next to them at the stoplight and, you know, do the finger. And then I thought, that's exactly what I don't like about them. So instead, I just stopped behind them and sent metta, which was difficult to do, but I really wanted to force myself to get out of that judgment. And that's what I've been trying to do. Just keep thinking about, these are also human beings that probably have a lot of things in common with me, even though I don't see that or don't want to see that. So that's been my practice lately, because I have had a hard time sitting still, meditating. So my practice has been more practical like that.
That's great. That's really great. That's really an important thing to do, I think. So I thought it was really interesting when Sam mentioned that for many of Trump's fans, this idea that they're exonerated from the shame, the various shames that they may have in their lives, because they're womanizers, or because they don't have a college education, or because they don't have money, or because they, you know, a cis white male, as he said, and there is this, you know, movement towards, you know, denigrating that aspect of American life. And so for them to be offered a space in which someone is not flipping them off, not calling them stupid and disgusting, I thought that was really a powerful message to all of us, that this is how we want to approach this going forward. Again, it's not to say that we don't stop them where it's necessary if they're about to cause harm. But, you know, driving around in a truck with flags is not, you know, inherently harmful. And so for us to to take that on as some kind of violent provocation is to up the ante, is to create a war where a war need not exist. So again, that's another great method to work with what's going on with us today. Thanks, Mariah.
Hi, it's Christine.
Hi, Christine.
Yeah, I'm listening to Sam, and then just what you said really brought up something that I haven't acknowledged, and that's that um, I'm very, very close to my siblings. And part of that closeness was it's how we stayed safe as kids. And it's been terribly frightening that one of my brothers is a Trump supporter. And I have a lot of shame about that. And he's none of the things that Sam Harris describes, but it's been very difficult for us and our family to understand how this happened. And I've seen both of my brothers get very, very close to coming into full-blown explosive conflict, which has never happened in our lives. We never fought as kids. I mean, this is all new. And they have 2 boys. They each have a son, 6 months apart. And I think that what has kept this from dividing our family are these babies. Because in those moments at family gatherings where I could see the tension rising, I could see them also divert their attention to those boys who don't know anything about this. And really perhaps anchoring in the innocence of those kids.
Yes.
And I think that we've all done that as a family. And so when you ask the question, how have you been managing? For me, it's been go to the preciousness in this moment. But I don't think I realized until listening and having you ask some of these questions, the degree to which this potential division in the family related to the divisive nature of our president has terrified me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. There's a way out. I mean, that's part of the reason for this evening is to present this idea that there's a way out. In the same way, there's a way out to whatever personal afflictions we find within ourselves. So when we have parts that we don't like, that flare up, that tend to be aggressive, in the same ways that we see certain members of society. What we do with those in the moment with a significant other, someone helping us, is we ask the question, so why do you feel the need to behave in this way? What are you afraid would happen if you didn't behave in this way? What are you afraid that we're not hearing? And so there, to a point, there needs to be more of those kinds of discussions rather than the way you feel is simply stupid and wrong. And so there's nowhere for anything to come into alignment with anything else when it's that cut and dry, which is not to say there aren't elements of some of the beliefs that are held by certain members of society that aren't that strong and do need to be combated in the best possible way, as I said before. But on the level of families and on the level of most of the discourse that could actually be happening in the country today, we could be doing this very, very differently. So, yeah, the innocence, I like that. Bringing back some of the innocence. So to add to that, when I really look around, and some of you I've talked to about this, at my personal life and the life of many of the people that I know, I wrote this to a friend Dharma teacher just today. And I said, the reality is, and I put a percentage on it. This might be a little bit high, but I said 97 to 100% of the time, I'm having interactions that are kind, respectful, even caring, certainly not disrespectful, open, even loving. And so my personal experience with the world is very different from the virtual one that I have from various news medias. Again, this is not to say that it's the lying media. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I am saying that I think one of the things this is actually doing is it's pointing us back to what we can touch and feel in our personal lives. because increasingly, as many of us know, the way things are going, it's going to get worse before it gets better in terms of the kind of information, disinformation, misinformation that's going to be put out there. And we all know now that the technology is such that very soon we're going to be able to make videos. We're going to be able to take you, Christine, for example, take you and your face and your voice. And we're going to be able to do that and put words in your mouth that you never said and make it seem so real that you and many like you are going to be on the defensive saying, I didn't say that. That is a computer generated, an AI generated, so on and so forth. And so given the fact that this is where we're going, we're not going to be able to stop this. All we're going to have at our disposal really to identify what is actually true is going to be more and more what's in front of us. And so, and I think that's really a beautiful thing, to begin to come back to relying on our actual experience as opposed to the things we actually see or read. So please, someone else, carry on.
It's Olivia here.
Hello, Olivia.
Hi, Ty. It's been a while since maybe about a month ago, we had a Studio B meeting, and a conversation came up about watching the media, engaging with the news on a daily basis, or reading newspapers. And I shared that my teacher before Sarah, who I'd studied with for many years, and also Sarah, had cautioned about watching too much news, like the talk about the sort of, what do we consume on a daily basis? What are we consuming? And, I grew up in a political family, so I actually, in a way, went the other way, which is to switch the news off. And my parents literally bought me a TV at the age of 30, saying, Olivia, you have got to start engaging with the news. Because the way I went was to nature and to my yoga practice and to, in a way, touch reality, touch real things. And in a way, that's how I still live. I ride my horse and I go out into the natural world and I connect to my practice. And I watch very little news and I read very few newspapers. Having said that, I don't feel I'm disengaged from what's going on in the world, and I don't feel like I'm not passionate about, issues in the world. But when we had this discussion as a group, I felt it raised quite a degree of opposing views, and almost the view that if we don't engage with the news and read newspapers daily, that we're somehow not engaged. Which is not my experience, if that makes sense.
That's a good point to make. That's a really good point to make, yes. Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Because there has been some pressure, I feel it, to stay engaged in the way of staying up on the news. And so what you're saying is, that's not a necessary takeaway from what's going on. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Ty, can I say something? You can hear from my accent, I'm not American and I'm not British. I'm actually from Africa. I'm an African woman. I was raised in Zimbabwe, which I don't know if you know where it is. It's a country in chaos in the middle of Africa. And it's really interesting for me, who have traveled widely and been all over the place. I was raised there. I still have cousins that live there. And life there is pretty drastic. People, the population is there, 8.4 million people being fed by the UN. That's how they are living at the moment. And I look at what's happening in the US and it's awful at the moment, but I kind of reflect on the rest of Africa and I think that is pretty darn awful there. And it hurts me that people where I grew up are being abused and they live like that. My sort of how I protect myself is I keep in contact with that. I don't want to forget what is happening. And I'm sure it's happening in other parts of the world. It's just that Zimbabwe is personal to me. I know it. And I don't want to forget that people live drastically awful lives.
So that's a beautiful counterpoint, Sally, to staying away from the news as a matter of preserving one's sense of how the world is actually operating, and then engaging in exactly what's going on, so that we continue to tender our hearts. So recognize the various privileges that we have, that we aren't living in those ways, and that people we know are. So yeah, there's some kind of medium there, to be sure. Thank you. So many of you will remember that I like to quote William James, who's an American psychologist. He's considered by some to be the father of psychology in America. And this goes to what you were saying, Olivia, too. This is at least attributed to him, this quote, "We are what we attend to." And so for all intents and purposes, we are what we attend to. And so I think it'd be very hard for any of us maybe to argue that point, that depending upon what we're attending to, we become, to a great extent, that thing, that idea, that feeling, that notion. And so it's incumbent upon us to be very clear, since there's only a certain amount of time in the day in our lives, we don't know how much time we have, what are we attending to? Are we attending to, I was having a discussion with a Maltese man today, and he was saying, he's got relatives in the US. He said, "You've all gone crazy there. The last 5 years, I've noticed that all you talk about is politics. That's what you're attending to. And it's making you all, sorry to say it, a little bit crazy." And so, of course, I heard that straight away. There is hyper attention being placed on politics, on polarity. And yes, of course, we all know we can blame various medias. We all know it's true now. It's not conjecture that Facebook and Twitter and various others have been reacting far too late, and that things like QAnon, which essentially is propagating outrageous conspiracy theories, has also been allowed to go on too long. So the people that are attending to that are going down the rabbit hole, doing what they call their research, not realizing that they're being researched down the rabbit hole. So being really careful about what we're attending to. It's also the Dharma. So if you want to feel whole and home and safe and loving and caring and so on, you're going to have to attend to those qualities of being in whatever way you can for those to manifest as a daily experience of life. So please, next person.
Hi, Ty. I'm Nancy. I actually do watch a lot of news, and I pay attention to politics a lot. And I just wanted to share. I've spent the last 3 weeks working on political campaigns a lot. In the last week, in particular, all day, every day. And one of the things I did was I was text banking for the state of Texas, Ohio, Michigan, and South Carolina Democratic parties. And so these were text messages we were sending out to large groups of people of every political persuasion. And so you can imagine the responses we got were all different kinds of responses. But I had a couple of things that I realized from this experience. One is the anger is on both sides, and the nastiness and negativity comes from both sides. Two, if you respond to the anger, the vitriol, all of it with kindness, you get softness. And so I just, moving forward, I think that's a place that we really need to kind of sit with, that we have to look at our response to how other people are, and realize that it's almost like when you have children and they're little and they have a tantrum and you raise your voice to them, then it sort of makes it worse. And if you're like patient and calm, it sort of calms them down. And so I think we all have to be really self-reflective, that it's not one side or the other, but we all really have to reflect on how we're moving forward and how we're reacting to other people, and that it's what we're putting out that affects how things are going to be. And it's not just other people. And so it was really apparent to me in interacting with all these different opinions that made a big difference if you were kind. So that's what I wanted to say. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. And so, yes, that sort of underscores exactly what Sam said. You know, if I'm a little bit less of an asshole today, that's a really good thing. Yeah, if I'm not back to Mariah, if I'm not, you know, doing this to the Trump guys, just, yeah, sending metta. Like they're feeling put upon. For wherever that came from, we don't have to necessarily understand it, but something is inspiring that level of ire. People who are suffering, we know this from all the great traditions, are going to, if they don't have some kind of practice, some kind of therapeutic understanding, they're going to project that suffering out onto others. And so it's for those of us who are working on ourselves, our own levels of suffering, understanding those levels, to recognize that some suffering has been put on these people who are reacting in these strong ways. That'll really help. I mean, just to pull up to a Trump truck and just recognize, you know, something, there wasn't a lot of love around for these men to be behaving in this way. It's not all men, of course, but I'm thinking perhaps more of the Proud Boys or Boogaloo, like this. So, yeah, the militias are feeling at the deepest of levels like we're a threat to them because we consider them less than, we consider them not as smart. And so, you know, maybe we don't want to do what you're doing, Nancy. And again, I applaud you for doing that. That's a really wonderful thing to do at a time like this. You know, maybe our way is more like Olivia's or my way, not canvassing, teaching. But whatever it is we do want to remember that we want to interact with another human being in the same way we want to be interacted with. And again, that's hard to remember sometimes because I know I can get flippy too. So, actually, this Dharma teacher friend who's well known, I'm going to read what he wrote to me because I forwarded him this Sam Harris, and he listened to it just this morning, and then he said, I'm going to change his significant other's name just so I don't reveal who he is. Jane also just listened to the Sam Harris podcast, which I need to understand, apparently, ! So even someone who's practicing a lot and has been practicing for many, many years needs to understand exactly this point, to remember it. Yeah, thanks. So next person, please. Thanks, Nancy.
Hey, Ty.
Hey,
me? How's it going? This is sort of where like the internal work has come in really handy for me, really important, is, you know, all the fragmented aspects of me and all the exiles and like the different parts. If I'm constantly turning away from them or trying to push them away, or the stronger they get, the more resistant it gets. And so I've been trying to take cues from that internal relationship to into a more accepting, compassionate relationship because there's this disarmament that happens once we relax, let go, and come from a place of pure self rather than ego. That in that environment there can't be really a conflict when there's just full acceptance, and just knowing that it's not my fault that those aspects are there. It's just part of my conditioning. And so it's not this person's fault that they're riding around in a truck and being angry people. It's just the product of their conditioning. And so I can have this compassionate response to that and actually have a conversation. I've actually experienced this recently that is disarmed and honest, and where you can get to sort of like the root of where they're coming from. And then there's this greater understanding that happens, which is a really beautiful thing. A recent conversation I had with my brother, who's a Trump supporter, and it became this really beautiful conversation. He didn't change his opinion, but at least there was a really honest, open understanding. I think that's really important. And as far as the news goes, most of our cable news is built to spotlight that conflict, and or even in the print news. And so I just sort of watch out for when I start to feel that conflict within, and then I know it's probably gone a little bit too far. I need to like back off the news a little bit, because both sides, there's of course more than two sides, but we all have our safe zones, and from that safe zone we feel like we can say anything and be protected. And once I start to kind of feel like that, I know I've kind of backed into that that safe zone a little bit too much. And so I like to hang out around the middle.
That's great.
Anyway, that's my
That's good, Adam. That's really good. That kind of reminds me, as I said when we started, when we are in our safe zones, perhaps that's the first place to begin to practice not reifying that safe space. We're all good here. We all think the same thing. We're all good people. And then we begin to denigrate the other side because we're in a safe space. And so even though that seems to be something that is just carried on amongst us in this safe space, that's an energy that's traveling outward. It's going through the walls, it's going out into the airwaves, and people are feeling that. So I would say that's one of the first places to begin to work, because it is a safe space, a place where we can sit down and begin to talk like this, like we're doing right now, so that we're not just trashing the other side. We're really trying to understand how to bring them in to a relationship. And also, for those of you who don't know the IFS work, one of the things you do with a part of yourself that you don't like, one of the first things you do is to try and befriend the part. So, and the way that one befriends a part is you at least attempt to listen openly and honestly to what that part wants to say. And there'll be parts of you that want to jump in and say, no, you can't say that. No, that's stupid. And so on. We all know these various parts inside of ourselves. But the way to most skillfully work with our inner parts, our inner committee, is to, when a part is acting up, just, all right, let me just see if I heard you correctly. And not say it in a condescending way, as we can do sometimes. Like, really, so I'm going to repeat back to you what you said, and I'm really going to try and be curious about what it is you're saying. And so that right there, if a part senses in any way that you're doing that in a disingenuous fashion, it's going to throw up a barrier. It's going to throw up a protection, a protector. And so to disarm that protector is to really lean into the curiosity. So you feel that way, okay. And so what begins to happen over time is you begin to really get a strong sense of that part's worldview. And if you get a strong sense of the part's worldview in a way that's not critical, a way that's not judgmental, you can begin to see, from the perspective of that part, what you're saying and feeling makes total sense. And so right there, you've befriended the party. You haven't said, I agree with you. You've just said, given that perspective, that makes total sense. And that also disarms in a powerful, profound way. So that's part of our work as well, across the aisle. So thank you, Adam. So we have 15 more minutes. I want to just stay aware of the time. So please, though, I want to hear from a few others of you.
Hi, how are you? I'm Chris. I'm with Britt.
Hi.
Hello, Chris.
I also just wanted, I appreciated the podcast you shared, and I just wanted to share some insight that I've gathered just by being able to zoom out from this whole thing, because it's been super intense and super engaging. And, you know, like many of the people in this chat, I think myself and Britt are both scared about the rhetoric and the things that are being said and the energy in the world. But I think it's also important to remember, even though the newscasts and these things show red and blue and like spanning the whole country, it's not the whole country that's voting even. So it's like 50% of the population is actually voting. And then that 50% that is voting is being forced to pick very polar sides, and they're being forced to factionalize themselves. And then everybody's hyper factionalizing themselves through technology and their own feeds and these things. And then the things that are the most outlier scenarios of those two sides are being highlighted and shoved into our brains constantly through Facebook, Instagram, and all these things that, you know, as of late have been topics of conversation, things like The Social Dilemma and these documentaries that are talking about these problems of the attention economy and pushing that attention and taking advantage of it for the monetization of our time. And so I think something that's helped me be a little bit more calm about it is, you know, when you're being forced to choose between Coke and Pepsi, if the whole entire supermarket is Coke and Pepsi and somebody walks out with Coke and somebody walks out with Pepsi, you're not necessarily going to be angry at them for choosing one of those two less than ideal beverages. And I think it's important to remember that of the half of the country that voted, half of the people truly did vote for Trump. That's what we're seeing in the numbers. But of those half, I doubt that full half is this person that we're scared of. And I think that there's an importance in remembering the hyper focus that we put on all these things and how much time we spend in picking a side and factionalizing ourselves. And by picking a side, we're separating ourselves from a whole. You know, just by picking that side, you're saying, I'm different than you. I pick this color, you pick that color. And I think in general, as a country, we just need to analyze our election process. And there's been a lot of stuff that has been, you know, pointed out, like ranked choice voting, things that allow us to, you know, choose A, and then this would be our B choice, would create less villainization on both sides of the aisle. And it's a huge problem in this country. And then I think it's a huge problem for people who feel the need to wear the coat, wear the color, and pick a side. So just something that's been keeping me a little bit calm is realizing that it's not as clear as the numbers and the colors are showing us.
Absolutely not. Thank you for that, Chris. That's wonderful what you just offered. Did you want to say anything, Britt?
Hi, everybody.
Okay.
I'm just sending peace and love out. We were speaking about that this morning, and he spoke so eloquently. I have nothing to add right now.
All right. Well, thank you. But thank you both. Yeah. Yeah. So I think if we began to have conversations that weren't highlighted through the media, that we'd recognize straight away how many values we all share as human beings across the world. Doesn't matter where we are. And so if we really connected to that, and again, that doesn't sell. And we are in the process of knowing that we are in an attention economy, essentially, grabbing attention in the best way we've known thus far how to grab that attention, which is a kind of negativity bias. And so we're onto it now. Like you say, there's films like The Social Dilemma that's out there now, that's been widely, that was #1 here in Malta a month ago. So it's all over. So the idea that we are being manipulated into feeling certain ways is now common knowledge, and it wasn't that long ago. And so I think that's going to spread. And with that spreading, we'll come to begin to see each other as not red or blue, but as, shades of everything. And that's, I think this is, we're seeing it come to the apex it's come to as a way of crystallizing it. We're all pretty fed up, I would say, with seeing things in this way. There's a few of us, of course, who enjoy this, but the great majority of human beings do not enjoy this level of polarization. So the good news, I feel, is we are on our way to seeing things a little more clearly. At least that's my hope. So thanks for adding your bit to this.
Hi, Ty. I'm Mary.
Hello, Mary.
Hi, B family and family I don't know. Just wanted to thank you for taking the time to share your kind words of wisdom, and also for everyone to be here to share this time together. Sorry, my cat wants to be involved. I think I'm leaning into love as we're coming to the end of the week a little bit more than, I think I'm responding more than reacting right now. My body is very fatigued. Not because I think that it's, that we're not doing well, because I really think there's a sense of sadness that there's so many people who have so much fear in their lives and let that dictate how they live. There's also a recognition of the work being done and the work that has to be done, and that is a little bit overwhelming right now. The victory is not won by any means, but I feel like the thing that I try to do every day is show up, to bring my voice in and bring my perspective in, and hopefully that people can see how I live and who I am as a person of color, and kind of destigmatize or allay their fears. I understand those communities. I grew up in that community.
Which one?
I'm from rural Iowa, so I know a little bit about just the lack of education funding there. I think where I'm most looking forward to moving forward myself personally is looking into education as a universal means of helping all of us all move forward, and bringing that into those low income areas that are very, very familiar to me. So I recognize the perspective of rural communities and people who are so scared, but I also realize until we start putting our boots on the ground, it's not going to change, really. I mean, my practice is what makes me go forward every day, and my love for the shared humanity, which I feel in all the spaces that I'm in. So that's kind of what's moving me forward right now, even as I feel weary, And that is a lot of work for us to do, but I feel like we have the capacity to do it by showing up.
Thank you, Mary. Were you referring specifically to being African American?
Yeah.
When you were talking about the work? Yeah. We do.
No.
So we can all do our part to be ambassadors for the world that we wish to see. I know my whole life has been about this, and I remember a time maybe in my 50s where I kind of felt I'm really weary of ambassadorship. And I sort of rebelled against that a little bit, but come back around to feeling like this is really an important and purposeful meaning to having this color skin. And so I'm going to use that in whatever ways I can to break down those barriers that we're seeing so highlighted in America right now. I think to add to that, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has been wonderful, and it's also highlighted a difference that has been an inadvertent sideshow an unintended consequence of what it's really about. And so, all the anti-racist movements, work that's going on out there, which is really great in the main, is also structuring reality in a very me and them fashion. And so there needs to be a kind of coming back to us again, which is not to say that the need to first feel safe spaces, differentiate, and so on. But there's something about highlighting the differences that causes what we're seeing, this polarity. And so what I sort of heard in what you just said is you feel safe in various parts of your rural community, which means you walk safely in white spaces and black spaces and in between spaces. And so I think that's an important thing to remember going forward is, what I'm proud of being Black, but am I walking into the room Black? Is that something I need to do? Is that a statement I need to make? Is that the ground I need to place a stake in? For a while I thought it was, and now I don't think so at all. So, but again, this is just my personal experience and where I am at this point in my evolution. It's not to say that there aren't Black people that shouldn't be, placing a strong flagpole somewhere, but there are consequences to doing things that way. And yeah, so thank you for your thoughts and for the work that you are obviously going to do and are doing going forward. So it looks like we're a little after. If there's anyone who made a comment who would like to clarify something they said, this often happens, or if there's someone who really would like to speak and didn't have a chance to, this is your last chance. Would you please say something to us if you wish?
Hey, Ty, this is Bjarni.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. And thank you for your sharing. And hello to all the Studio B family. Just really quickly, for me, it's been perspective and just remembering that having spent this last week watching my wife's grandfather pass, and when I feel the hate or see the need to give the middle finger, like Mariah says, I want to remember that they are somebody's son, somebody's father. They are maybe confused and maybe need that safe space that they've never been given before. And being that close to the very end of someone's life, the perspective is that I would die for that person to try to save them. And I would pull them out of a burning building, and I would not question what their political belief is in that moment. So for me, the perspective is very important for getting through that, that this is just a charade of our existence, and the real heart we all share.
Beautiful, beautifully said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So with that beautiful understanding of where we are, where we might be, the reality of death, the reality of the love that we all have deeply in each of our hearts, every human being, every single human being. Dick Schwartz even thinks people who are really on the far end of pathology are capable of being brought back. So opening our hearts and focusing on the love that's there and sharing that in the ways each of you have illuminated is your way to do that. So thank you for sharing the ways you have, and thank you for listening, those who have been listening. And just before we actually go, is there anything you'd like to say, Jen, before we wrap up here? Anything you want to add? Thank you, Studio B.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for all of you for being here. I think that what I've been reflecting on is we are in Northeast Pennsylvania, and I live in Luzerne County, which is very polarized. And these are people that I grew up with and love and care deeply for and struggle to understand and also understand. And so I was reminded scrolling through social media last night when I saw a dear old high school friend post something that was rather hard to look at. I was thinking about him, like, at a basketball game, goofing around when we were probably 14, and thinking that that's still the same person. So I was just feeling really grounded in memories and friendship and that innocence. And it's still there. And that quivering of the heart. It's a wakefulness that makes me feel still connected.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So everyone, thanks again, Jen. Finding your supports, whatever those supports are for you, and asking others, how can I support you? Mm-hmm. And it's also important to remember that even in asking how you might support someone, you may already be full. And so it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to be the support, but the asking of the question brings something forward for people. Often we're not asked enough, how can you be supported? Because it stimulates within ourselves this sense of, oh, what is that? And to be clear on what our supports are is to be able to reach for them. If there's no clarity about what that is, there's chaos, there's confusion. Mm-hmm. And so there's no possibility for the intentionality that would carry us to the well-being that comes from that kind of support. So thank you all again. And
thank you, Ty. Thank you so much for your time and your energy and presence and wisdom. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everyone, or good afternoon in many cases.
Thank you, Ty.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful afternoon and evening. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen.